Okay, folks, I want to present the Shaded Tangle project as a watercolor project. So if you happen to have some watercolors here, I have a pretty nice set, scored it at a garage sale. But I love the school watercolor set. Um, I have myself set up with, which isn't in the picture, but I've got two things of water. I like to have one for clean water and one, for rinsing my brush out. I also like to keep a paper towel or some kind of rag around that I can dry my brush out. That's a good thing. And if you can recycle an old water spray bottle, I strongly suggest it. But really, all you need is water. Okay, so that said, when I come to this, I just give myself a little quick spray over my paints to kind of rehydrate them. And when you are getting into your brushes here, I'm going to just take out a medium one. Always wet your brush in water before you let it hit the paint. It's better for your brushes. Okay. That said, watercolor is a translucent medium. So that means that you can see through it. All right. So I have a little water on here, and it's not that saturated. So the color is it's not that saturated with water. The paint is going to be very strong. Okay. The more water you use, the lighter the color becomes, the less saturated it is. It has less pigment in there. I think it's a good habit to have some kind of either old plate or piece, something that you can work in. In other words, you're not mixing your paint in your painting wells. Couple of things. If you're working watercolor and you are just like taking the green and putting it there and taking the orange and putting it over there, it's very formulaic and it's kind of paint by numbers. And so you want to use some kind of palette so you're able to mix and play with your saturation and play with bringing in another color into it, right? I don't have that number color in my palette, but I can bring in more yellow and play, right? So I do try and have everything kind of as a transition when I paint, just like I would do if I was using a drawing. Every little section that I'm going to approach, ultimately, I want to have some transition in it. Is that a rule? No, but it's kind of my guideline. Okay, that said, I have set up the project. Got my paints over here. Similar to the same setup as the shaded tangled, okay? And when I paint watercolor, I do like to try and have it so that I am able, I hope I don't, to angle my board. Okay, this will help you control the flow of the water with the paint. Okay, do you have to do it that way? No, you don't have to do it that way. This is just my suggestion to you. Okay, all right. So I have my little sections set up. And when I come in with my watercolor, I'm going to lay down, and I'm going to use a little more here. Lay it down. Now I don't know. I'm hoping you can able to see that in the camera, in your view. When I angle my board, I get what is called a watercolor bead. You see how from the angle, the watercolor kind of beads down? That said, I'm going to try and keep my watercolor flowing. So right now I'm practicing what is called the flat wash. Okay. And I'm filling that section. Keeping it moving. Don't let it sit. If I come back in, kind of retouch that up, my watercolor is going to pool and you'll have these watercolor blooms in there and it won't look even. Do you have to have it even? No, you don't have to have it even. But a lot of people like even. Okay. All right, so if I want to take up that little pool at the end, I'm just going to, I've rinsed my brush out, dried it on my pant leg, paper towel, and I've cleaned up that blot. Okay. Now, if I wanted to come back in here and paint into it, if I come in there with another color, I'm going to come in there with some green. If the paint is still wet, you'll notice that it starts to bleed. If you want bleed, that's fine. But it's hard to control. If I come in there with just clean water, you'll notice that, again, that watercolor starts to pool. All right, you can see it pooling around in there. So if I want to keep it kind of in layers, I'm going to let that dry. And I'm not going to work on anything else in that section until it's dry. When I come back onto it after it's dry, I can put another flat layer. I can put a gradation layer, which I'll show you. I can put little detail brush strokes on that. Could be kind of little patterns in there. That's fine, but it should be dry if you don't want it to bleed. Okay? All right, so I'm going to show you how to do a gradated wash. All right, so I've got I'm not working here, working at a neighbor. I've tilted my paper. If you are working with just regular paper, I mean, ideally with this, you do have it on a board, taped down to a board. If it's copy paper, it's probably gonna buckle more. So watercolor paper is best. The thicker the paper, the better. Oh, this is a big cell here. Okay. All right, so now instead of just going with green all the time, I'm replacing it with lighter and lighter water. Kind of bleeds out. I'm letting the gravity, kind of letting that paint gradate, fade down. You can kind of see it drinking down there. Okay. I'm gonna let that dry. I might come back to that later. Okay. I'm gonna do another one. I'm gonna work over here. I'm gonna do gradated again. I'm gonna get a really sopping wet brush. All right, here I go. Sopping wet brush. Working with my watercolor bead. Coming in with my next, I think I'm changing colors. I think I'm going to transition that to yellow. Start bringing that in. Oh, it's so wet. It's flowing upward. Okay. Oh, I don't like this. All right. It's all right. Sometimes we make mistakes. If you make a mistake, there's a couple of ways you can approach it. See how it's pooling there? Looks kind of messy to me. I can do this. I can take my brush, clean it, kind of dry it off a little bit and sop that back into my brush. Okay. I can move that paint around until it is dry. All right, that's a little better transition. So that is kind of, that's the start of a gradated wash. I'm like replacing the paint as I move along, okay, from one color, and then I replace it with another color. All right. Watercolor tends to be done in layers, and so because it is translucent, the light comes down and it bounces off the paper underneath and reflects back through the paint. It gives you kind of a stained glass luminous effect. So a lot of times people think of working with watercolor as painting with light. That said, it is my favorite medium. It's hard to get used to, but once you kind of get used to it, I think you really kind of learn your brush techniques really strong and well. So I actually start our students with Pioneer students with watercolor techniques so that they are able to go into acrylic paint and kind of work the brush better, work the paint better. That said, all right. So is this one? Oh, that's still wet. Not going to mess with it. Now, if you kind of want to hurry your paints along, some people come in here with a hair dryer and you can dry your paints really quickly. Okay. I'm going to come in and I'm going to bring in some red. This is wet on dry paper right now. And now I'm going more gradated wash. Again, working that pool of water down, keeping it flowing. All right. Strong right there. I'm going to take that up. All right, whatever. Okay. I might end up having 5, 6, 7 different layers of paint, but keep blocking it in. Unless you want your paint to bleed into your next cell, you have to kind of jump around so that your edges are dry. But it's really fun, and you can do layers, different approaches, and just have fun with it. Try and have your, if I had red over here, I might bring some red over there to balance it, Think of your elements and principles of design. All right, so that is a watercolor approach with the shaded tangle.